of a politics reality show that we're made to watch every single day. How far will this go? Only time will tell. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Europe Speaks. Today, we're taking a deep dive into President Donald Trump's new approach in Gaza, a policy that has sparked intense debate not only in the United States but also across Europe. We'll explore the reasoning behind the support for this bold and equally important move and examine the critiques from European leaders and media. So let's get to it. First of all, as you may have realized, we see Trump on the news every single day. From a European perspective, it seems like a reality show even. Shockingly unbelievable comments like, let's turn the Gulf of Mexico into Gulf of America, let's invade Greenland, and let's make Gaza the Riviera, the French Riviera of Middle East. This is all in a way, he is true to himself, he is honest in most cases, but the things he says leaves Europe and also European parliamentarians in shock and awe. So this is something he's really good at, and it seems like this is becoming more, would call it the reality TV show of politics, because this is what it has come to. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, making politics into a reality show, and this is how they engage with their audience. Every other day we see Trump making another shocking statement at another press conference, like, oh my god, did you hear what Trump said? It's like Keeping Up with the Trumps. You know, he is very good at engaging the audience. But anyway, let's get to it. Another shocking statement made by Trump has proposed that the United States assume control over the Gaza Strip after the fighting ends, with plans to redevelop the area into a French Riviera of the Middle East. His plan involves the forced temporary relocation of Gaza's 1.8 million residents to neighboring countries like Egypt and Jordan. Commentators in publications that I've read, such as The Guardian, CNN, and Al Jazeera, have widely condemned this proposal, with some even describing it as tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Critics argue that forcibly displacing an entire population is not only morally reprehensible, but also a violation of international law. So, is it? Let's first look at the supporters of Trump. Some supporters contend that the long-standing instability in Gaza has only worsened under decades of passive diplomacy. They argue that by taking control of Gaza's reconstruction, the United States can create a secure environment that curtails illegal immigration and prevents extremist groups like Hamas from gaining a foothold. For these voters, Trump's plan is seen as a necessary disruption of the status quo. So proponents claim that multilateral negotiations have repeatedly failed to resolve the conflict. From this perspective, a unilateral and even a controversial action by the US might finally force both regional and international players to re-engage with a more fresh and effective strategy. They view this approach as a way to force accountability where diplomacy has fallen short. Some supporters also point to promises of rapid economic investment and humanitarian aid. They believe that a firm, centralized approach could rebuild Gaza faster than piecemeal international efforts, potentially creating a model for future intervention in conflict zones. So they're actually talking about how ineffective the UN is. For these supporters, Trump's plan is a radical but necessary intervention that actually promises long-term stability, if it works as advertised. Looking at European parliamentarians, European critics are voicing strong opposition. So their arguments include a violation of international law. They actually says this violates international law and state sovereignty. Many European leaders and legal experts warn that the unilateral intervention in Gaza sets out a dangerous precedent. They argue that taking control of a sovereign territory without broad international support undermines international law and could lead to further destabilization in the region. For European diplomats, multilateral negotiations through bodies like the United Nations are the only acceptable way forward. And there's a risk of escalating violence. So critics contend that military intervention is likely to provoke a violent backlash from extremist groups and could ignite wider regional conflict. Instead of resolving issues, they fear that such action might lead to unintended consequences, including more casualties and a deeper humanitarian crisis. From a European perspective, Trump's approach is reminiscent of old imperialistic policies. European officials stress that sustainable peace in the Middle East requires a dialogue and cooperation among multiple nations, not a top-down imposition of control by a single superpower like the US. And then there's the argument of long-term instability. So skeptics argue that even in the short-term order is achieved, the long-term implications could be problematic. The dismantling of existing political structures without a clear, inclusive plan for political transition may lead to prolonged instability. European critics emphasize that the road to peace must include inclusive governance, respect for human rights, and long-term economic development strategies. some observers suggest that Trump's proposal may be less about an earnest policy shift and more about employing extreme rhetoric as a bargaining tool, a way to widen the window in regional negotiations. By presenting this outrageous idea, Trump may be attempting to force regional actors to offer a compromise that falls short of his radical vision, while simultaneously appealing to his core supporters who admire his defiance of conventional diplomacy. However, experts do warn that regardless of its intended use as a negotiation tactic, the underlying concept of forced displacement is both impractical and dangerous. It risks derailing ongoing ceasefire agreements and hostage negotiations, and it could inflame long-standing regional tensions. These critics fear that by choosing unilateral action over diplomacy, the US might alienate key allies, damage its international reputation, and ultimately worsen the conflict. However, I don't think allies will turn against the US. So where does this leave us? On one side, Trump supporters see bold intervention as the only way, only path to breaking the cycle of ineffective diplomacy and ensuring security and economic revival in Gaza. On the other side, European critics warn that such a move could violate international law, escalate violence, and undermine decades of multilateral efforts to achieve lasting peace. From a European perspective, the skepticism here is clear. While the promise of decisive action is appealing to some, the potential risks and long-term consequences cannot be ignored. So while a group of proponents see Trump's plan as necessary, if extreme, the overwhelming critique, both domestically and internationally, labels it as reckless and ethically indefensible proposal with the potential to cause far-reaching instability and a humanitarian disaster. But let's not forget, let's leave a gap for interpretation and see what his actions will be, because as they say, actions speak louder than words.